Have you ever really thought about how we try to put things like our feelings or life events into these little compartments? Like we feel like, this event happened over here and it's nothing related to this over here, so I'm going to keep them completely separate. I'm going to put this in one room and I'm going to put that in the other room and they'll never have to cross paths. Some of us feel like we're really, really good at this, that when stuff happens, we're really good at saying like, okay, I can keep that over there and I'll keep this there, and I can just put it away for a second. And some of us feel like there are no compartments in our life. Like we are just one big bag and everything goes in that bag. There's no, everything's just mixed. It's just a big old blah. And the funny thing about this is that have you ever thought about how we really try to put things, events, feelings into compartments sometimes? Like we think like, oh man, this event is non-related to that event, so I'm just going to keep them in separate rooms and they never have to cross paths. And some of us are really, really good at that, or at least we think that we're really, really good at it. And some of us are like, no, I'm horrible at that. My life is just one big bag. There are no compartments. Everything's just a mess. And if you have no idea what I mean by putting things in compartments, this is a little example. Like let's say you wake up in the morning and then your parents are on your case because, well, your room's a mess. And then you head off to school and you're like, oh man, that was so sucky that they were so mad. Like, why would they get so mad over my room being a mess? I'm just going to go sleep in my bed again, so why make my bed? And you're like, okay, well, I'm going to get over that because I'm at school now. And then you say like, oh, like a friend says something to you that really hurts your feelings. You're like, why would they say that? Like, I don't get it. Like, that really hurt me. But now you're off to band, or you're off to a sport, or now you're off to doing some art thing, and you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to put that behind me because now I got to focus in on this. And really throughout the day, we're just like juggling all of these things, pretending or trying to act like we're all fine, but things aren't fine, are they? It's really like we have all of these things in our heads where we have all of these plates spinning that we're trying to keep spinning, and we're thinking to ourselves like, okay, I have this over there and I have that over there, but really we don't. Because really what we have going on is that we have these stories that we're writing in the back of our minds. The honest truth is that even though we say we try to put things in their compartments, we don't. There are no compartments. We don't keep them there. And this is how it usually goes. Because our parents were on our case in the morning, because our rooms were messy, we lashed out at our brother at breakfast. And because we lashed out at our brother at breakfast, we still had that in our mind, and we came to school kind of frustrated. And so when our friend said those mean words, even though they didn't mean to be mean in any way, those words echoed someone else telling us, you're not good enough. And so while that friend, again, didn't mean any harm, words matter. They weren't completely tucked away. These things that we thought were in these categories weren't completely tucked away, and we started forming and we're wrestling with these stories in our heads that, man, my parents don't like me that much. Why would they talk to me that way? Why would they treat me like that? My friends must really hate me to say those kinds of things to me. And then worst of all, it's like, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm not lovable. And again, we're wrestling with these stories that we're writing in our heads. And part of the reason is because we are so relational. We're wired to be in relationships with other people. And the fact our relationships with our parents will affect how we relate to our friends. And how we relate to our friends will affect how we relate to school. And maybe that cycle of how we relate to school will then affect how we relate to our parents. And there are a million different connections that we can think about how we relate to each other. The person who cuts you off on the street, that relationship might affect how you go into a meeting, how you go into, some job interview, how you go into whatever family event it might be. Again, we are so connected. We've been created for relationship. It's so integrated to how we live. We don't even know how deep it actually goes. We're not conscious of it. We don't think about it enough. But it's everywhere. That all these relationships, no matter how big they are, no matter how small they are, they're interconnected with another. And I think about this and I'm like, man, to have these connections, to have these relationships be so integrated into each other, so like webbed all over the place, it can really cause a lot of damage. But on the flip side of that, it can also be something super, super beautiful. I mean, think about this for a second. You don't know what someone's day looked like earlier today. You don't know the things that person's dad says to them day in and day out, day after day after day. You don't know what just took place in someone's life right before they got here. And so when they're quiet, when they're not as bubbly as you are, what are those things, what are those messages that you are sending to them? I mean, are we mindful of the words that we're using, our actions, the looks that we give? All of those things have an effect on other people. And in the same way, like the things that we do, those actions can be really destructive, but also they can be really, really beautiful, but it depends on what message you're sending to those people. At a human level, all of you, people have a human side of you. Even if you think you're a robot, you have some humanity inside of you, and you were created to commune with one another, to the person next to you, to the person across from you, to your neighbor, to your mom, to your brother, to your sister, to your friends, to your acquaintances. You were created to connect with them, to commune with them, to do life with them, to share joys and pains and laughs and tears, all of those things. But what happens if those relationships start to break down? If we feel like, oh, we're not going to commune with those people, we're not going to do life with those people, when that starts to break down, the thing that you were created for, when it becomes an us versus them, when it becomes more about being right than any other thing, everything else will break down. Again, when the idea of relationships start to break down, everything else will start to break down. Because we stop seeing each other as God's creation and that we were meant to do life together. When we stop seeing people as people, when we stop seeing people as God's creation and we label them as enemies, we make them objects, things like war and famine and genocide and human trafficking, all of those things start to happen. I mean, we see this now, don't we? I mean, you can look on the news, you can look at school, you can look wherever you want, and you see that politically, racially, religiously, like all of these things, it's like we've been divided into camps. These ideas of like, if you're not with my idea, well then you're my enemy. You're against me. You're stupid. You're ignorant. And words matter in the kingdom of God. Words matter when it comes to building this kingdom that Jesus talked about. And when we're putting people in these camps and we're using these words like enemy and stupid and ignorant and worthless, what kind of kingdom are you really building with those words? How are you lifting people up like that? Or maybe it's not even the words that you're using, but more importantly, it's maybe that's how you're treating them. That you're treating them like an enemy, that you're treating them like they're stupid, you're treating them like they're ignorant, you're treating them like it's them versus us. Jesus didn't see those labels. And you see this over and over and over again, that he's hanging out with people that he shouldn't hang out with. He's talking to the people that he shouldn't talk to. He's taking time out of his day for those who are interrupting his day. Jesus didn't see those labels. Jesus saw children who needed a father. And again, he came to give life and give life to the fullest. And I think this is why Jesus talks so much about having relationship with the person next to you, of defining who your neighbor is, of defining what it means to connect with God, that is vastly different than just following the rules. It's communing with one another. Because he knew that if you stopped communing with the person next to you, if you stopped having relationships with the people around you, if that started to break down, so would everything else. And Jesus talked more about this than anyone around him at the time. I mean, Jesus talked about not just loving your neighbor, but loving your enemy. Jesus talked about leveraging not only what you have for yourself and really blowing that out of the water and saying, everyone does that, but I want you to leverage what you have for other people. Jesus talked about being hospitable to strangers, that the people that look nothing like you, who act nothing like you. He said, be hospitable to them. And while this might seem common to us now, this was so radical back then. While Jesus was teaching this and walking this, like, it was so radical. And to us it seems common, but the truth is it's still very much radical, because this is what happens. We know it and we hear it, but that's part of the problem. It's become so known. It's become one of those things that we just say over and over again. But it's only radical when we actually live this out. Again, you can have the great thoughts, you can think all of this stuff, but until you put it into action, it doesn't mean much. And it's really when you start to put this in action that it becomes something radical, something godly, something kingdom building. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. You know, I read this a couple weeks ago to kind of kick things off, and I want to revisit it because it's something that we gloss over a lot of the time. We don't really give it much thought of, like, what does it mean that we were created in the image of God? What does that mean that he thought of mankind? He said, I'm going to make them in our image, in our likeness. And the more and more that I think about it, I mean, it really means that we are just a little slice of God, that we bear his image, that when he breathed into our lungs, that same air that we're breathing out is a little bit of him. That when we share interactions, they're godly interactions, because again, we are a slice of God. And again, this might sound a little bit out there. This might sound like, where are you going with this? Like, this sounds crazy, Stephen, but I don't think it's that far out there. That maybe when we reject people, when we are mean, when we are sharp with our words, and when we use those words like stupid or worthless, or with our actions we say it's us versus them, or worse, that we're apathetic, that we don't even care or mind to see people, to hear people, to listen to them, to acknowledge them. That when we do that to people who are the image bearers of God, that we're really doing this to a slice of God. That our words, our actions, those are all directed to God. You know, I think of this great parable in Matthew 25 where, you know, it describes two different types of people. You know, there's the sheep and the goats. And he says that, you know, when Jesus comes back, he's going to separate the people into these two groups, the sheep and the goats. And he says, you know, basically, all of you who are the sheep, the good guys, you gave me food when I was hungry. You gave me drink when I was thirsty. When I was a stranger, you invited me in. When I needed clothes, you clothed me. When I was in prison, you came to visit me. For you guys, the kingdom of God awaits you. You have an inheritance there. And the people hearing this are kind of confused. They're like, Jesus, I don't understand. Like, when were you naked? When were you hungry? When were you thirsty? When did we see you in prison? When did we see you in this state that we could serve you like that? And then Jesus looks at them and he says, listen, when you did those things to the least of these, when you did that to the people who were by themselves, when you did that to the stranger who was thirsty, when you clothed the person who had no clothes, when you invited the stranger into your home and you gave them a drink of water, you did that to me. And then the parable continues, and now he's turning the tables, and he's looking at the people who are the goats, these bad people. And he says, listen, when I was thirsty, you didn't give me drink. When I was hungry, you didn't give me food. When I was naked, nothing. When I was sick, nothing. To you guys who call yourselves Christian and yet you act this way to people, you're cursed. You're cursed with Satan and all of his angels and all of his, people. Like you're cursed with him. And it's a crazy thought to think like, why? What is it about treating people that's like, okay, when you serve the least of these, you are blessed in the kingdom. But when you didn't, well, you're cursed. And then Jesus says, how is that possible? Like, when did we have the opportunity to serve you? We would have. It's like, no, you wouldn't. Because again, these are image bearers of God, a slice of God. And when you served them, you served me. And when you didn't serve them, you didn't serve me, because they are image bearers of God. And I think about this, and I think about like just how convicting it is for me, because I think just this week, who did I come in contact with? Who did I have interactions with? Who did I have conversations or not have conversations with? Who did I avoid? Who did I walk up to? And when I saw them, how did I see them? How did I treat them? How did I speak to them? Did I lift them up? Did I tear them down? Was I just apathetic? Not really listening? Not really caring? Just wanting to get out of the conversation? And the reason I think we can fall into these pits of not seeing people as image bearers of God, as a slice of God, is because we forget what God did for us. We forget how good He actually is. Jesus came to commune with us. He came down from heaven to seek us. But more than that, He saw us as an image bearer of God. Again, children who needed a father. And because of His death, because of His resurrection, He made it possible that we could actually become His children, be part of that family, be part of that inheritance. And there's a real distinction there, that you can be an image bearer, but yet not a child of God. Everyone on this planet is an image bearer of God, but not everyone on this planet is a child of God. You become a child of God when you recognize and trust in what Jesus did for you. When you see how grand that is. Again, a guy leaving heaven not to come be a king on earth, but to serve those, to serve the lonely, to serve those who are His enemies. You become a child of God when you really see how you were sought after when you were God's enemy. When you were loved, when you were truly unloving, when everything was given for you, even when you gave nothing. Again, God came and chose to commune with us. And in this relationship, in any relationship, again, it can be devastating, but it can also be really, really beautiful. And in the gospel, you have both the devastation and the beauty. You have Jesus with the devastation of being truly forsaken from God. But then you also have the beauty of Him bringing us in, that He steps away from Jesus only to step closer to us, to have communion with us, to have community, to have a relationship, to bring us in as His children. And I think when we have that thought, when we have that idea of what Jesus did for us, of what God did for us, of how He chooses us over and over and over again, we can do the radical thing. And I say do the radical thing, not just think it, not just know it, but do the radical thing. To love your enemies, to forgive those who persecute you, to give to those knowing that they can't give anything back to you. To pray, to feed, to clothe, to sit with, to laugh with, to cry with, to do life with. As Jesus followers, you are called to love God and love others. That this is the greatest commandment, and the greatest commandment isn't just one, but it's two. But in these two, it actually makes up the one. Again, as Jesus followers, you can't do life alone. But also, you can't let others be alone in life. And when you come to think about this relationship, you can't put things in compartments because that's just not how we're wired. And so when you think about the person that you're running into, when you think about the person who seems standoffish, don't just think about how it's making you feel, but think about them. Put them first before yourself. Again, what does it mean to love that person who seems like your enemy? What does it mean to love that person who seems like they're persecuting you? What does it mean to love the people who don't always make you feel happy or fulfilled? Or pouring into you, like pour into them. Again, you can't do life alone, and you can't let others be alone in life.